everyone. Let's just make sure that we're up and streaming and everything is looking good. I'm also giving you guys some time to come in because we are live, super live, the liveliest one in the bunch. Okay, so let's check the streams because I really want to make sure that everybody sees it, and we're using some new streaming software. Haha, boom. There we go. We are live. Okay, I am Ken Vermeil. I'm the founder and CEO of Vermilion Sky, and this is another episode of the Tech Entrepreneur Office Hours. Today, we're using a new software called Restream, and it allows me to actually see your comments and chats, and I can actually talk right back to you. Hey, Brian Griffin, how's it going? Today, on Tech Entrepreneur Office Hours, we have a couple of questions, and we're also taking live questions in between our question answering. So if you are an entrepreneur or a tech entrepreneur and have ideas about building or growing or scaling or building $1 billion app, that's actually the last question for today. Feel free to hop on in the chat, ask a question. Or you could also email us and send us a question. Oh, that's Brian Griffin from Family Guy. All right, so we're going to get right into it. Our first question is, what does it take to be a good CTO and how many years of programming do I need? All right, so a CTO, well, it depends on the type of CTO. As I've said in the past, a CTO, there's a couple of types of CTO. The first type of a CTO is somebody that really just does management. They manage your developers. They ensure that your developers are growing, learning, keeping the code base clean, ensuring that they're following proper procedures, setting up procedures, creating procedures. That type of CTO is like a management type of CTO. Generally speaking, a management type of CTO does do a lot of initial code setup, but they aren't necessarily the best coder on the team. They could just be somebody that has great management skills, they understand software architecture, and they have a vision for the technology platform for the future. That being said, you do have to understand, you kind of have to have a deep love for architecture, and you have to understand how other developers fit into creating the architecture. So you don't necessarily have to be the best developer in the world, but it's more that you need to understand architecture. Now, if you are a startup scrappy CTO, as in you're the first hire, and you definitely need, you're definitely in the code on a day-to-day basis, then yes, you have to be a pretty good developer because it's you. And you also don't want to create, if you're the CTO, you also don't want to create code that's bad that gets pushed to your customers, that's buggy and it doesn't work. You don't want to do that. So I would pretty much suggest that you should have about 5 years of development experience under your belt. Some would say that that's too little, but the reason why I say 5 years is by 5 years you pretty much have a couple of projects under your belt. You pretty much understand the way that a project will work. You've also developed like habits that work well for you. You also have a good understanding of you also have a good understanding of how your code will impact your future. Hold on, we're getting another message here. Let me just make sure that everything works. All right, great. So I hope I answered your question, and we're gonna hop on to another question. Question: what should a first-time startup founder know before starting up? All right. So when it comes to a first-time founder, one of the things that you need to know is that it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to go anything that you've planned. It's not going to go that way the moment that you actually start developing this idea. So, because of that, you need to, I wouldn't say lower your expectations, but I would say temper them. Because the moment an idea comes out of your head and onto paper and in front of all other people, it's going to change. It's going to change so much that after refining it, after testing it, and making sure that you've done your customer research and making sure that customers get the gist of your product, it might change. One of the things that I find with founders is that they probably want to build a product for themselves. And although it would be super great if you have a personal product that works specifically for you, you still have to make money off of the product. And because you have to make money off of the product, it just can't appeal specifically to you. It actually has to appeal to your target audience. Now, if you are very similar to your target audience, by all means, everything that's in your head that goes onto paper or onto a computer screen that you send to your designers and developers to develop your idea, all of that will definitely work. But most of the time, it does not work out like that. The other thing that I'd like first-time founders to know is that it's going to take much longer than you think to become successful. And that you need to have a high tolerance of failure, because you're going to fail towards success. And that means never really giving up, never doubting the core of your idea. So not necessarily the features or the implementation of your idea, but the core problem that you're solving, never really doubting that, and always leaning on customer feedback and where your current market is going. Once you do that, then you'll be able to fail in the right direction. All right, and now on to the next question. Question: does a CEO need to know how to code if they have a tech startup? If so, what are some courses that you suggest? So I'm going to show my bias here. I'm going to say the CEO needs to have some type of understanding as to what the technology behind their platform. Again, the CEO doesn't have to be a good developer. They could just be good enough to be dangerous, as some people like to say. And it also depends on whether or not you have a CTO or if you have a development team to actually help you bring your idea to life. And also just depends on budget, because programmers, they do cost a pretty penny. And because of that, you might be in the position where you have to develop the initial version of your idea. In that case, then you'd have to be good enough to be able to create a prototype. And in that situation, yes, you could go to a boot camp, learn a whole bunch of stuff, then implement your idea. But most of the time, I find that people who go that route don't necessarily like being a developer. They just want to create their idea. And there might be some scenarios in some cases where it might be cheaper to actually pay somebody else to create a prototype of your idea. Go through the startup process where you pitch your idea to investors, show them your prototype, and get some type of funding to then move to the next stage. It might be cheaper to do that than to actually go through the boot camp, spend the time and energy required to learn how to code, code a product for your live market, and then hope that everything kind of works out. Now, I'm not knocking boot camps in any way. Definitely, if you want to have a job in the dev industry, there are a lot of great boot camps out there that teach you the basics, and then they even teach you how to get a job. So, not knocking boot camps for that, but founders who want to go to a boot camp, unless you're going to be the main dev for your application for a couple of years, I wouldn't necessarily suggest it. But that being said, from what I see, they're all pretty good, but you have to make sure that they fit your personality. So if you're not necessarily if you're a self-starter and you really don't need like a lot of hand-holding, then you could probably just go and kind of skip the boot camp and learn development on your own. There are a lot of free and paid tutorials that are out there. Yeah, there are a lot. But if you do need somebody to kind of help you and guide you and really understand the structure around the mental structure and the mental framework around code, then I would definitely suggest that you take a 12 to 6 week boot camp, and then you ensure that you know that the goal of this boot camp is building a product. And honestly, maybe your capstone project could be the beginning of your startup. The other thing is, in that same scenario, you might have the opportunity to meet programmers who are in your class, who you could say, hey, let's start a hobby together. Well, let's start my startup as a hobby together. And then later down the line, if you guys get funding, you pay them or you make them a co-founder or any cool stuff like that. All right. Next question is, how can I make sure that my app idea is successful? So to answer that, there's no way that you could make sure. There's no guarantee. There's no steps or framework that you take to say, okay, well, I've done these things, and now I know that I'm going to be absolutely successful. Absolutely successful. But there are a couple of things that you could do to decrease the risk and increase your chances of success. One of those is to ensure that you're always very close to your customer. You're watching them. You could describe your customer's problems better than they can. And you should always build that process into your weekly schedule. Whether that means every Thursday at 4 p.m., I'm doing customer research, or I'm interviewing a customer, or I'm helping a customer understand the features and benefits of my product. That's the main thing. However you do it, you just need to make sure that you're very close to your customer on at least bare minimum a monthly basis. If you are, then you could really start to learn about their customer. You need to be able to actually describe a day in the life of your customer. When they wake up, what do they do? What time of the day do they encounter the problem that you're trying to solve? When they do, what are some of the other solutions that they use to ease the pain of the problem that you're trying to solve? It's a lot, but by understanding your customer you'll know where you can monetize. You'll know where you could how you could build features and how those features can fit into your application and how those features are benefits to your customer. Now, the other thing is, what does success mean? Success could mean, so depending on the route that you take in your founder journey, success could mean I got funded and I have my salary paid for, I could work on this forever and ensure that we get continuous rounds of funding for the rest of our lives. The other route could be, I want paying customers day one, and I want to be able to ensure that I'm solving their problem and they're paying me the moment that we launch. And so because there are a lot of different roads, I would first ensure that I'm tracking the correct KPIs, key performance indicators. by knowing your key performance indicators and optimizing towards your key performance indicators, you'll be able to know if you're on the track of success. And that's actually the second thing that I would say. I'd say that make sure that you have one or two KPIs in the beginning, and you ensure that you're always, any action that you take, every feature that you build, anything that you do is always optimized to that initial KPI. There could be a secondary KPI, but I'd say focus 80% of your efforts on the first KPI and 20% on the second KPI. When it comes, that way that you could, one, set up success, and then two, understand exactly how success looks like based on your key performance indicators. When it comes to a revenue-based business model, obviously revenue is a key performance indicator, but depending on the other aspects of your business model, it could be how many people sign for a free trial, how many people stay on the platform for more than 30 days, how many people refer your application to others. You have to make sure, and these KPIs actually change during the life cycle of your application. In the very beginning, it could just be, we need users on the application, how many people are on the platform, and how many people, and how are we growing day by day? What's our retention rate? How many times do people delete our application? And cool stuff like that. So that's the way that you could be successful, is minimize risk as much as you can, be very close to your customers, follow your key performance indicators, and ensure that you're always focused on solving your customer's problem. On to the next question. Let's actually check and see how everything is going. Well, people are liking the next stuff. Next question. I want to be an entrepreneur, but I have a ton of ideas. How do I choose the right one? So one of the things about this Tech Entrepreneur Office Hours is I'm getting these questions and I'm just answering them off the top of my head. Which is always exciting and it's always interesting. But let's jump into this question. If you have a ton of ideas, I would say that you'd have to test them. Well, one, I would first limit them, because if you have a ton of ideas, you're already leaning towards at least the top 10 that you know, like in your gut, that that's going to be a success. So step one, cut it down to maximum 10, right? Once you cut it down to your top 10, then I would say that you should test and validate each idea. If you have the time, I would say spend a couple of weeks on each idea. Take the time to actually develop it. Use a framework like the business model, the lean canvas, or the value proposition canvas to really highlight your hypothesis, because essentially you're just doing the scientific method where you come up with a hypothesis. I'm going to build an application that does X, and I'm going to do this because it solves Y problem, right? Once you do that, you have to figure out whether or not Y problem is actually very important to the people who experience Y problem. It could be that the problem that you're trying to solve isn't really a big of a deal, or the solutions that are currently in the market already provide enough value that you would not be able to provide. For instance, if I wanted to create a new type of shoe, right? Let's say that I wanted to create a type of shoe that helps people who have six toes. Now, the best thing that I would have to do, well, the first thing that I have to do is find people who have six toes and take the time to talk to them. And I'd also take the time to even see if the current five-toe optimized shoes are enough for them. If they're saying that, hey, I'm totally fine, it's not really a big issue, then you can, well, one, you just validated that your problem has a low pain point. And because it has a low pain point, you do not want to build a 5-foot shoe. They could literally say, oh, well, I just get a size bigger. And that's, and yes, you could build a shoe specifically targeted to that market, but you might not get the traction that you're looking for, and you might not you might not choose the right idea. So I'd cycle through your top 10, ensure that you're always testing with your customers, ensure that you're always making sure that there's a market for these ideas. If you could easily prove that there's a market for your ideas, you could do this through market research. You could do this to actually talking to the market and learning about their problems. One of the actually really coolest things that we've been using is hopping into Facebook groups of specific communities where they discuss their problem. And you don't have to ask. Most of the time, you don't even have to ask. You could just sit there and listen to what they're facing. And while people are talking, you'll see suggestions. You could just be a fly on the wall in the group, and you'll start to understand how you could actually market to the people and how you could actually get them onto your platform if you decide to build that app idea. So narrow down, validate. You should validate maybe to 3, right? So let's say that 7 of them, there's no market, nobody wants 6-toe shoes, and you're like, okay, cool, I have 3. Then I guess you just choose the one that you would be most passionate about. That's one of the things that being an entrepreneur, that can help you is definitely passion. If you're super passionate about the idea and you definitely know that you're willing to solve it, no matter what it takes, and no matter how much adversity that you face by solving the issue, then choose the one that you're most passionate about, and that's your idea. And after you choose that one idea and you create a super successful product, make sure that you send me 5%. Because I helped you. All right, next question. What is the best time to launch my startup? Should I wait until the economy is better? I would definitely always say that the best time to start your startup was last year. The second best time is yesterday, and the best time is today. So, yes, the economy might not be super great and rosy, because of certain issues. But that did not stop PayPal, for instance, from coming to fruition. After the dot-com bubble, right, a lot of people lost a whole lot of money on internet startups. It was like everybody thought that, if you had a .com, you were just printing money. However, the issue is a lot of companies didn't have a business model. And not only did they not have a business model, they had too much money. And because they had too much money, they just would waste it on frivolous things. They wouldn't waste it on creating customers and doing, actually running a business. But PayPal did. PayPal had a good strategy. And if you have a good strategy, it doesn't matter how the economy is doing. In fact, if the economy is doing poorly, then you have more opportunities because the main players, the people who own chunks of the market share, they're going to contract. And because they're going to contract, they're leaving market share on the table for you. So I would never say don't start. I would never say, wait for things to get better, because the moment that things get better, actually, even before the moment the economy gets better, what's going to happen is by that time, all of the bigger players have already come up with a strategy to deal with the economy shrinking. And now they're going to, well, the ones that survive end up becoming more competitive and they take more market share. You want for your product to get to gain traction during times of economic uneasiness, because why not? It's actually a bit easier for startups to operate during this time. Now, if you just recently got funding and you have a specific runway, things might not be going great for you, but by this time your CFO or your advisors would have already told you how to allocate and utilize your money, so you should be okay. But don't wait. Even if you don't have a budget, even if you don't have anything, I would start immediately, because when you start, you build momentum, and as you build momentum, you'll be surprised as to all of the opportunities that start coming your way because you've started. So start today. And if you need help, you could always call me. Hold on. Let's just respond to some comments. All right, so let's see what's going on here. Let's hop into the next question. Recently, you said that design needs to be 3 weeks before development. Doesn't that mean that it's not agile? Kind of. The issue with design, so earlier this week, in one of the app tips of the day, to give you guys context, one of the app tips of the day was ensuring that design has a good lead before development. You don't want development and design happening side by side, because if you do, what happens is that the developers actually run out of work to do, or they can't complete their work, and they're waiting for the designers to actually complete the design. The other issue is design isn't a linear process. And because it's not a linear process, what happens is you end up you end up doing a loop. You design a solution, after designing the solution, you then test that solution with potential customers, and there's a possibility that that test fails and you have to go redesign another solution. Because of that, you can't do this during an agile sprint. With an agile sprint, you already have work that's set to be done, and you can't pull that work out of the sprint. And if you do, what happens is it slows everybody down. It slows the designers down because the designer is now pressured to come up with a solution quickly that also might fail. It slows the developers down because they have no user interface to build. And it slows the entire project down because now, instead of getting this feature done, you're now going back to you're going back to design. And it takes time. So the solution to that is actually to have design 3 or 4 weeks ahead of schedule. What you should actually do is you should actually determine what your release should be. So if you're releasing on a monthly schedule, or even if you're releasing on a weekly schedule, you should have an idea of what the full release should look like. And then you would have the designers design for what that full release looks like. After that release is designed, then you pass the entire package to the developers, and then they could then prioritize what work that they have to do. They could continue to move stories from left to right without actually having to bother the designers. In the event that they do have to bother the designers can jump in, do what they got to do, and quickly leave. That way, and then after they leave, they're able to continue working on whatever they need to do. There can be times where design can slow down because of either new features or new scoping ideas. But when that happens, you still have enough buffer for them to not catch up. So keep design, I'd say actually design first, give a nice buffer room. I mean, if in the event that you have to have developers working during that time, I'd say optimize the developers to working on the back end that does not need any UI, even though that's still risky, but still have them work on known back-end features to the best of their ability. And yes, you might not ship anything for 4 weeks, but you'll at least not waste time after that 4-week period. All right, so we're coming to the next question. Should I use Go or Node.js for a mobile app backend? Is there any real benefit for using one over the other? When it comes to backends, everything is great other than PHP. PHP is terrible. And I would never suggest anybody build anything in 2020 in PHP. When it comes to Go, Ruby, Node, honestly anything, feel free to build it in whatever. It really actually depends on who's building it. If your team is specialized in Go, there's no reason for them to actually jump to Node.js. If your team is specialized in Node.js, then there's no reason for them to jump to Go. A couple of years ago, I remember dealing with a couple of clients, and they wanted Python only because they thought that Python would make their app better, right? But in reality, it doesn't. What makes your app better is the quality of your code and how it's used to optimize towards success. And the quality of your code also depends more on your team rather than what you're using. Now let's take a step back to PHP. The reason, yes, you could build something good in PHP, but the problem is PHP is not an object-oriented language. Then again, you could also say the same thing with JavaScript, which is also not technically an object-oriented language. But you can make it work as an object-oriented language, which gives you a lot of access to a lot of great features. Yes, you could also say that PHP can be an object-oriented language, but PHP is outdated, and we live in 2020, not 1987. So ditch PHP, Go or Node.js, it's completely fine, either or, just whatever your developers are, well, should I use? Oh, whatever you're interested in, then it's fine. Also, if you don't know Go and you want to start a serious project using Go, I would take the time to develop a couple of practice projects so that you get the gist of Go and so that you understand the syntax of Go before starting your actual project. Next question. If I suggest a feature for an app, if I suggest a feature for an app and the company creates my feature, can I ask the company for money? The short answer to that is no. The reason why it's no, well, the short answer is no, because you can't really prove that you presented that feature to them, because they could have gotten that feature idea from their customers. Their customers could have been asking them for that feature. So you can't necessarily say, oh, well, I told you about you know, this TikTok thing, and maybe you should implement TikTok in Instagram. And it'll be cool. You can't do that. Now, if you had a meeting with the company, right, and you had them sign some type of NDA or some type of, and again, most of these companies won't do that because they understand that by doing something like that, they're putting risk on the company. But if you did that, if you made them sign an NDA and then you pitched your idea to them in a business setting, and then they take your idea and go without, after signing the paperwork, then yes, you can demand that they give you money and you can actually sue them and make a pretty penny. So that would be the only way that you would do that. But if you're suggesting ideas to the company, you could also kind of parlay that into some type of employment. So you could say, look, I'm a project manager, well, I'm a product manager, and I can definitely help build upon the application. Here are some of the ideas that I have. Here are, here's what I think would work. Here's some of the user research behind that. And you can definitely get a job like that by accident, if that's what you want. All right, and the final question. How can I make a $1 billion app? You can't. No, I'm kidding. To make a $1 billion app, you would have to build something that touches 1 billion lives. That's generally the criteria of doing something like that. Or something that touches 1 million lives at least 100 times. Well, 1,000 times. Yeah, that's the math. By having that metric, and anything that does that is a big idea. That's like an Amazon. That's like an Apple. Something that has some type of mass market appeal will definitely net you $1 billion. But it has to be a big problem that affects billions of people that you could tap into and find an easy answer to it. Generally speaking, $1 billion apps are pretty difficult to build, and they take many years and a lot of effort to build. They also take a lot of marketing and specific marketing plans to break into different regions and different markets and age groups. So when you're trying to build a $1 billion app, you have to keep that in mind. If in the event that you wanted to build a $1 million app, it's pretty much the same thing. It's thousands of people, thousands of interactions, thousands of problems solved. That's essentially the way the markets work. If you're able to solve a big problem, or even just create delight for hundreds of thousands of people, you will be rewarded with billions of dollars. So it takes time. One of the other things is if you create something and then it gets a $1 billion valuation, and the valuation that's out of the scope of this office hours. However, if you guys want to ask that question for next week, I'll definitely answer it. So if you, there's people here. If you go through the process of actually doing that, then you'll be able to, if you go through the process of coming up with an idea that touches 1 billion lives or 1 million lives multiple times, what happens is it's difficult to implement. But if you start small, if you start only trying to touch 100 lives, right, or 1,000 lives, by doing that, you'll start gaining the momentum that you need to actually get to 1 billion lives. All right, and that is it for our Tech Entrepreneur Office Hours. Thank you guys so much. If you actually want to be on Tech Entrepreneur Office Hours, you can definitely email me at, my email and ask your questions. And I'd love to hear from you guys. I'd love to hear any feedback. Tell me how good I look, all that stuff. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate you for watching. Thank you guys so much. And I will see you next week.